The sole source of this extremely popular lie about Jefferson ordering the Marine Band to play at the Capitol church services is one remark from a letter written by a woman named Margaret Bayard Smith, the wife of Samuel Harrison Smith, a Philadelphia newspaper editor who moved to Washington in 1800 to establish a national newspaper. There is not a shred of evidence that Jefferson had anything at all to do with the Marine Band being there, but the revisionists will somehow work Jefferson into any of their stories about government-related religious activity, whether he actually had anything to do with them or not. And judging by Mrs. Smith's description of these Capitol church services, which were obviously more of a weekly social event than religious worship, the Marine Band probably just showed up for the same reasons as everyone else. And apparently they really sucked at playing church music.
I have called these Sunday assemblies in the Capitol a congregation, but the almost exclusive appropriation of that word to religious assemblies prevents its being a descriptive term as applied in the present case. Since the gay company who thronged the House of Representatives looked very little like a religious assembly, the occasion presented for display was not only a novel, but a favorable one for the youth, beauty and fashion of the city, Georgetown and environs. The members of Congress gladly gave up their seats for such fair auditors, and either lounged in the lobbies, or round the fireplaces, or stood beside the ladies of their acquaintance. This Sabbath day resort became so fashionable that the floor of the House offered insufficient space. The platform behind the Speaker's chair, and every spot where a chair could be wedged in, was crowded with ladies in their gayest costume, and their attendant beaux who led them to their seats with the same gallantry as is exhibited in a ballroom. Smiles, nods, whispers, nay sometimes tittering, marked their recognition of each other and beguiled the tedium of the service. Often, when told, a lady would leave her seat, and led by her attending beau would make her way through the crowd to one of the fireplaces where she could laugh and talk at her ease. One of the officers of the house, followed by his attendant with a great bag over his shoulder, precisely at 12 o'clock, would make his way through the hall to the depository of letters to put them in the mail-bag, which sometimes had a most ludicrous effect, and always diverted attention from the preacher. The music was as little in union with devotional feelings as the place. The Marine Band wore the performers. Their scarlet uniform, their various instruments made quite a dazzling appearance in the gallery. The marches they played were good and inspiring, but in their attempts to accompany the psalm singing of the congregation, they completely failed, and after a while, the practice was discontinued. It was too ridiculous.
Another widespread lie used by Barton is the one about Jefferson sending missionaries to evangelize the Indians.
Now, if you jump to something that Jefferson did in 1803, Jefferson as President of the United States has to negotiate a lot of treaties with a lot of different Indian tribes, but the tribe in 1803 he negotiated with was Kaskaskia Indians. You see the treaty here up top. It's a treaty between the United States of America, Kaskaskia Nation of Indians. It's signed at the bottom by Secretary of State James Madison and President Thomas Jefferson. You see the two signatures there. In this treaty, Jefferson put federal funds to pay for missionaries to go evangelize the Indians. In this treaty, he also put in federal funds so that after the Indians had become converted to Christianity, we would build them churches in which to worship. Jefferson doing direct funding of evangelism with federal funds?
Well, these claims that Jefferson used federal funds to pay for missionaries to go evangelize the Indians and to build churches for them to worship in after they were converted to Christianity would give the impression that Jefferson was trying to convert these Indians to Christianity, right? Wrong. The Kaskaskia Indians that this treaty was made with were already Catholic and had been for many generations. They were converted by French missionaries in the late 1600s. It was the Kaskaskia who asked for these religious provisions, and there was no reason for the government not to agree to them. Our Bill of Rights didn't apply to sovereign nations, which is, of course, what the Indian tribes were. The treaty negotiators were perfectly free to agree to any religious provision requested by another nation, as long as it didn't have the effect of establishing religion among the citizens of the United States. This was made very clear in the House of Representatives back in 1796, when the very unpopular Jay Treaty prompted a debate about the treaty-making power that went on for weeks and covered just about every conceivable aspect of treaties. Among the provisions that the Kaskaskia asked for in exchange for the 9 million acres of land they were ceding was $300 to build a church and the salary of their priest for 7 years. That was it. One church, one priest. But Barton turns it into plural missionaries and plural churches to make it sound like Jefferson was making some sort of widespread effort to evangelize the Indians, and of course his audience eats it up. Now, Jefferson signed over 40 Indian treaties while he was president, and this 1803 one with the Kaskaskia was the only one to include any religious provisions whatsoever. In fact, out of the hundreds of Indian treaties made in the first 50 years after the ratification of the First Amendment, only 9, including the Kaskaskia Treaty, contained provisions related in any way to religion, and even these were typically just provisions compensating either the Indians or missionaries who had established missions on the land being ceded for the buildings they were losing in the treaties. And another interesting thing about the Kaskaskia Treaty is that Jefferson, in his address to Congress that year, was going to include what the exact provisions of the treaty were. But when his Secretary of State, James Madison, looked at the draft of his speech, he advised Jefferson not to mention the religious provisions. Madison had been in that debate back in 1796, where it was agreed that the religious provisions in a treaty did not violate the First Amendment, but he feared that some people, quote, may see in it a principle not according with the exemption of religion from the civil power. So contrary to the revisionist claims that nobody back in those days would have seen anything wrong with federal funding of religion, James Madison was worried that even this few $100s of government spending on religion in a treaty that gained the United States 9 million acres of land would make people uneasy that the government wasn't strictly adhering to the First Amendment. So in his speech, Jefferson didn't specify the church and the priest. He just called them other articles of their choice. One of Barton's most mysterious lies has to do with a document that he claims was dated by Thomas Jefferson in the year of our Lord Christ.